I got this incredibly horrific pain down the backs of both of my legs, and I could not get comfortable. And at 4 a.m, I cracked and rang 111. I don't know why I didn't ring 999. I think that's because I didn't think it was an emergency. So the ambulance arrived 2.5 hours later, 6:30, took me off to hospital on a lot of gas and air, which did nothing for the pain. And when I was in the MR scanner, as they were pulling me out, I couldn't move my legs. Everything from the waist down had stopped working. And I remember coming out saying, I can't feel my legs, can't feel my legs, can't feel my legs. And they said, no, you'll be fine. And I said, this isn't good. And then they said, we need to do another scan later on this evening. And then you're going to Southampton to have emergency surgery. At 10 o'clock the next morning, they operated. A surgeon came to the bed and I said to him, was that a success? And he said, well, it depends what you mean by success. He said, if you're asking me, have I got all the shattered remnants of the disc out of your spinal cord, then yes, 100% successful. But I do have to tell you there's a chance you're never going to walk again.
I was thinking about this perceived gap in our own ability versus the perceived demands of a task. So I'm thinking of there's a study a few years ago, well, been a few studies you may have heard of, where you get men and women to do a particular task and then you say, okay, you've got to then do a test. You can practice it as many times as you like, and then when you feel ready, you do a test. And men generally were, I think, around 65% or felt around 65% ready before they said, yeah, we'll do the test. Whereas the women wait until they were, say, 85, 90% ready before they did the test. What would you say to the women in that who they're clearly waiting? There's clearly a gap there in the perceived confidence levels. How can the women maybe address that? I'm just thinking about, increasing diversity and inclusivity in jobs and in the industries. How can they build their own self-confidence when they're just as capable but don't perceive themselves maybe to be?
I might flip that slightly differently, because I have had this conversation on a number of occasions with people in the workplace, because diversity and inclusion is an interesting topic which I won't delve too deeply into, because I believe that if everybody is given the same opportunity, it's then up to you as an individual, irrespective of gender. It's up to you as an individual to decide whether or not you want to do it. Now, within my own organisation at NATS, we have roles come up all the time, and we look inwardly and say, why are no females applying for these roles? That it's not that they're precluded from applying for them, they're open to everybody. And so I went and asked some ladies at work, I said, why did you not apply for that? Perfectly capable of doing it, why did you not apply? Well, because there are no role models at that level. So why not become the role model? And then what they said next really made me think, and actually is probably the answer to your question. They said, well, look at that. That role sits in a team of 6, and all 6 are men. So if I become a woman in there, I am different to all of those people. And I said, well, why is that an issue? And she said, okay, well, let's flip that on its head. If that was 6 women, would you apply? And I thought, that's a really good question, because whether we like it or not, men and women are different. The way that we think, the way that we act. And if you put 6 men together, 6 women together, and you give them a task, I suspect the same task, give us answers to this, you'll get different answers. And that's a broad generalization, I get that. But it wasn't until that lady said to me, would you apply if you were going to join a team of 6 women? I thought, yeah, I would be a little bit uncomfortable doing that. It wouldn't stop me, I don't think. I've never been in that situation. And so an awful lot is said about diversity and inclusion, and how do you diversify a workforce? Well, you've got to give the opportunity. And if the opportunity is there and people aren't applying, then you have to think, well, why are people not applying? And there's all manner of reasons, and it's a very individual thing, isn't it? So I look with interest at the latest round of airline recruitment for pilot cadet schemes. And I'm sure the recruiters at those airlines will be asking themselves the same questions. But let's see, of the 80 people that apply to this airline, or the 80 spaces at this airline and the 40 spaces at this airline, what are they looking to achieve? Surely you are looking, here's all the tests, I need 80 people. Logic dictates I pick the best 80, because to do anything other than that isn't fair on the people that have applied for it. If you pick the top 80 and they're all white men and women, then you've got to ask yourself the question, so why are the people who aren't white not in that top 80? Then you start to understand the diversity and inclusion bit, because the opportunities is there for everybody else. So does that come then down to confidence? Does it come down to, well, I haven't got a role model there? You know, this is the domain of not somebody like me. And that is, I think, the quandary for everybody in any recruitment or any organisation. How do you make that work?
Yeah, you need those. Certainly having visible role models, I think, is a real key to improving diversity and inclusion within, the aviation industry as a whole, isn't it? But with regards to equality and equity, often we touch on this a bit later, but do you think that maybe there can be some support tailored? So even if it's just, like you're saying, you talk to these women and say, why haven't you applied to these roles? Because you're more than good enough. Maybe it's some mentoring or some coaching, because they've got the skills, but maybe they need that vote of confidence from someone, and even maybe just you saying to them, you're good enough, apply for it. That could be enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and equality and equity is an interesting one, right? So there is a phrase that, so equality is giving everybody a pair of shoes. Equity is giving them a pair of shoes that fit. And it's how you marry those two up. How do you say to somebody, and to use that example, I did say to that individual, so you are more than capable, so this now just comes down to you and your perception of yourself outwardly, or how you're viewed outwardly, and your inward perception of yourself. And we all have that, am I going to be good enough? We all have that. And anybody who says they don't is a liar, because we all have that. I won't go as far as to say everybody's got imposter syndrome, because I don't think everybody has. But we all question our own ability when we do something new, especially if it's important to us, because you don't want to fail. You don't want to fail. You will, but you don't want to, because pride kicks in at that point, both professional and personal.
In fact, actually, it's interesting to hear you touch on imposter syndrome, because it's something I was going to touch on a bit later on, but since you've mentioned it, we'll talk about it now. So have you ever felt imposter syndrome in any of your roles?
I don't think I have, honestly. I felt wow, this is all a little bit overwhelming, but I've never felt I shouldn't be here, because I'm there for a reason and I'm there on merit. So it's natural to feel nervous. Of course it is, but especially if it's something that you've never done before, because you just think, I don't really want to get this wrong. But I've never stood there and thought I shouldn't be here, or what am I doing in amongst all these people? Aren't they great? Because I think the second you start to do that, you start to chip away at your own self-confidence. And once you start doing that, it's a fairly rapid spiral downwards, because you then start to compare yourself. And today's world, by the way, is not, I'm so pleased I'm not 7, 8, 9 now. I really am, because the pressures of social media are incredible, what they do to kids. When I was a kid, bullying took place in 2 places, at school or on the way to or from school. Now, kids are getting bullied in their own bedroom because of social media. And that's a really bad place to be in as a society.
Yeah, there's no safe space, is there?
There isn't. And so it doesn't surprise me that kids, especially kids who perhaps haven't developed any mental resilience yet, if they're not getting an opportunity, if they're being bullied from the age of 6, sitting on a phone, and I won't go into an argument about what's the right age to give a child a mobile phone. There are safety reasons why people give children mobile phones at 10, 11, 12. But then I would hate to have had that when I was growing up.
Absolutely.
In many ways, it was so much easier. In the early 80s, it was go outside, kick a football for hours on end, and the only thing was, when the street lights come on, come home, because that's when I'm going to give you your dinner. and that was it. Great. It was so much easier in those days.
So one of our guests is actually saying that they've come off social media as a way of looking after their mental health. Do you use social media much?
Not often now. I did. So I used it. I set up, so I was always on Twitter since 2010. I found it quite useful in the early days for news and sport, and now it's too toxic, so I don't engage on there. And I set up an Instagram account after my injury, just to try and share my story, to try and help other people. And bizarrely, because I don't have thousands of followers, I don't crave thousands of followers, but bizarrely, it touched people in different parts of the world. So in Argentina, in Spain, in France, people who have some people with the same condition, and some people who just were paralysed for other reasons have contacted me, and we are still in touch. So please don't stop your posts, because they're really helping me understand where I am and where I might be able to get to. So that's the positive side of social media, but I can't be bothered with all the other nonsense side of people just contacting you randomly to sell stuff and will you do this? And no, I'm not interested. So, and again, I suppose I'm quite lucky I can switch off from that stuff. I don't find, I always say to people when I mentor them, especially if they're going into leadership roles, I think that the error that a lot of people make is they think you have to be people's friend to be able to lead. You don't. But it is an interesting conundrum, right? Because one of the greatest leaders this country has ever had was Admiral Lord Nelson. And he was loved by his men, absolutely loved by his men. But not because he curried their favour, but because they respected him as a person. And that's what I say when I coach people. You cannot manage stroke lead by having favourites, because that will just break down really, really quickly. Just be consistent in your approach and be fair. And not everybody's going to like what you do. Not everybody's going to like you, but you're not there to win friends and influence people. You're there to do a job. And as long as you're consistent and fair, people will understand. Now, one of the best bits of feedback I ever had was when I left my job as a watch manager and became a deputy general manager. One of my teams, I had a team of 9 supervisors who all reported to me. One of them said to me on the day I finished, he said, "Thanks very much for the last couple of years." He said, "Really enjoyed working for you. Didn't always agree with what you said. Didn't always agree with some of the things that you did, but I always understood why you did them." And you can't get better feedback than that, because you know, that for me meant, well, good, at least I explained why. And as long as you explain the why, human beings, they'll react in one or two ways. They'll either not like it, and then they'll go away and have a think about it and think, well, that's just how it is, or they'll say, okay, it's fine. That was how I was thinking anyway. So, you know, that would always be my advice, and is my advice to people: be authentic and be true to yourself.
So I want to talk actually a bit about leadership later on, so I'm really glad that you brought it up. Just to finish, we were talking about imposter syndrome. So I was saying a lot of people do feel that, or, you know, like you've even said that if going to a situation that you've not been in before, you know, of course everyone's a bit nervous. What advice can you share with our listeners and viewers about overcoming those nerves, you know, first day at a new job, or can I apply for this promotion I'd like to go for? What advice can you share with us?
Yeah, have confidence in your own abilities. You will never be put in a position, or you shouldn't ever be put in a position in any role, if you're not capable of doing that role, because the person who's putting you in the position is investing in you, be that with their time or with their money. If they own an organization, they're not going to put you in there for you to fail. So someone else or other people have thought, yeah, you can do that. So go and build your confidence. You're not going to go in. I mean, there's a fine line, right, between confidence and arrogance, and some people fall foul of that too often. But the other thing I find is, I suppose I can only link it to, some people like talking in public, some people don't. I love talking to audiences, big audiences, but only when I know what I'm talking about. And that I guess is the lesson. Preparation is key to all of this. When I talk about my story, I don't need to prepare, because it's my story and no one really knows whether what I'm saying is chronologically correct. It's a story. I'm telling a story. If I'm giving a technical presentation I am far more nervous, especially if I'm giving it to a room of technical experts. Because guess what? There will be people there who know far more about it than me. And they're going to ask me really tough questions at the end, and I'm probably not going to be able to answer all of them. But that's fine, because you work out mechanisms to say, you've got to be honest, as would be advice there. If you don't know the answer, be honest, I don't know the answer. Because the moment you start trying to make it up is the moment it unravels very quickly.
I think also showing that humility, I mean, it's sort of touching on leadership, isn't it? You're giving a presentation to a room full of technical experts. You're going, actually, I don't know everything. No one knows everything. Absolutely. And it's having that humility to go, I don't know the answer. I can go and look that up and I'll find the answer out for you. And I think that actually makes you then more respected as a leader overall.
Well, the best advice I ever had was again from my dad. So as a spotty 20-year-old, when I first joined the Air Force, when I got my first posting, I turned 21 2 weeks later. My dad obviously had been in the forces, and he said, he said, you won't because you're not this type of person, but don't go there and think just because you've got a tiny little bar on your shoulder that you know anything, was what he actually said. He said, you certainly don't know more than the people who are sergeants and flight sergeants who've been doing it for 20 years. So my advice to you, son, is get to know these people and learn from them, which is exactly what I did. And it really worked, because the respect was gained very, very quickly. And you can't know anything as a 20-year-old. You just can't, and you've got to learn from people. So learn from the people who know the tricks.
Exactly, and draw on the team around you, because that you've got all these resources around you. Make the most of them.
100%, because there isn't. I mean, you said it before. Not one person knows everything, and we can all get caught out.
But it's difficult then when you're put in a position where you feel like you're almost expected to know everything to balance the two.
Yeah, but humility is the thing, and honesty. I will always say, be honest, be authentic, because people warm to that. We're all human beings. When we all go home at the end of the day, we all have the same thoughts and the same emotions. And if somebody's watched a presentation from someone who said, actually, I don't know, and they've watched a presentation with somebody who didn't know but pretended that they did, I know who they're going to have a better respect for.
So Brian, tell me a little bit about what happened to you then in May 2018 and how everything suddenly changed.
Okay, so I'll go back a week before, so April the 29th, which, if I got my dates right, was a Saturday. And I was actually shopping in a local supermarket and using the self-service checkout. And as I put the item through, my back went into spasm. Now, I've had problems with my back all of my life. I had back surgery in the early 90s. I'm blessed with a thinner spinal canal than you would have, or the average person would have. And I was aware of the condition which I was ultimately diagnosed with, but never really used to worry about that, because I thought the chances of that happening are so slim, don't even think about it. But anyway, go back to that supermarket. I'm stood there and I was all twisted and I couldn't move. I literally couldn't move for 5 minutes. So I was stood there and there's a queue of people and they start, come on, mate, hurry up. I was like, can you not see I'm in a bit of distress? So I managed to sort myself out, go to my car, and I had quite a low car at the time, and I could not get in the car. Physically couldn't get into it. I tried all these different positions, and I remember standing in the car park in tears thinking, I can't get in the car. I didn't think to call anybody. I just had this, got to get in the car, got to get home, got to ring a doctor. So managed to do all of that, and it was a Saturday, and they said, I rang 111 and they said, you need to be seen by a doctor. My dad actually took me to the urgent care place where the doctor was, and by this time it's about 6 o'clock on a Saturday evening. They tested me for all sorts of stuff and said, no, there's nothing major going on here. Here's a load of pills, take those, you'll be fine. So fast forward to the Thursday after that Saturday, and I was starting to feel better. I was more upright, the pain was getting better. And then from 9 o'clock on the Thursday evening, I got this incredibly horrific pain down the backs of both of my legs, and I could not get comfortable. I was like a dog looking for a bed. I put my chest on the bed, I tried lying on the floor, I couldn't get comfortable. And at 4 a.m, I cracked and rang 111. I don't know why I didn't ring 999. I think that's because I didn't think it was an emergency. And they said, we're going to send an ambulance to you, but we're really busy. The ambulance will come when it gets to you. So the ambulance arrived 2.5 hours later, 6:30, took me off to hospital on a lot of gas and air, which did nothing for the pain. And I remember they dumped me in A&E, and they said, "Oh, just go and take a seat over there." And I said, "Well, I can't sit. I'm in too much pain." So I stood by a wall for an hour before anybody came to see me. And I was in so much pain, I was punching the wall in pain. And then a female doctor came past and said, "Oh, you look to be in a bit of distress. Why don't you come with me and I'll put you in a bed?" She put me in a bed, wired me up to morphine. And then bizarrely, 10 minutes later, came with a clipboard and said, "Can you fill in this questionnaire to say what your experience has been like so far?" And I said, "No, I'm in too much pain." They took me upstairs to a ward, an A&E ward, and said, "You need to be scanned because we need to find out what's going on. You're now under the care of a surgeon in Southampton." So they've taken me to a hospital in Portsmouth. "You're now under the care of a surgeon in Southampton, but he needs to scan you." And when I was in the MR scanner, as they were pulling me out, I couldn't move my legs. Everything from the waist down had stopped working. I couldn't wiggle my toes, I couldn't move my feet, I couldn't lift my leg. And I remember coming out saying, "I can't feel my legs, can't feel my legs, can't feel my legs." And they said, no, you'll be fine." And I said, "This isn't good." And then they said, "We need to do another scan later on this evening. And then you're going to Southampton to have emergency surgery." I said, "Okay." So they did another scan, put me in an ambulance, took me to Southampton, but didn't operate that night. For whatever reason, I don't know the reason, I didn't ask. At 10 o'clock the next morning, they operated. It was a short operation, 48 minutes. And I was wheeled back to the orthopaedic ward, which is an interesting place, 6-bed ward. A surgeon came to the bed and I said to him, "Was that a success?" Because I thought, problem, solution. This is how my brain works. Problem, solution. That was the problem. He's fixed it. Surely he's fixed it. And he said, "Well, it depends what you mean by success." He said, "If you're asking me, have I got all the shattered remnants of the disc out of your spinal cord, then yes, 100% successful. But I do have to tell you there's a chance you're never going to walk again." And I looked at him, I didn't know what to say. And I felt like I was watching the conversation rather than being part of it. I felt like I was up there looking down. And I just looked at him because I didn't know what to say. I said, "Well, we'll see." Because I didn't believe what I just heard. I thought, that can't be right. What had happened is the condition's called equina syndrome, and that is where the discs between your vertebrae and your back impinge on the spinal cord and the nerves. And mine had shattered. So that normally happens in car accidents or in, bad falls where you compress your spine. But it had just happened to me overnight. And the chances of it are 1 in 100,000. So it's quite rare. It gets misdiagnosed quite a lot. But it is fairly terminal because orthopedic wards are interesting. There was a guy next to me who was an amateur jockey and a guy opposite me. It was a really hot bank holiday weekend. And he'd been thrown off a horse. He'd fallen through a greenhouse and they both broke their backs in 3 places. 2 days later, they walked out. Well, 2 days later, I was still lying in the bed, unable to move anything and paralysed from the waist down. And paralysed from the waist down doesn't just mean that your legs don't work. It means that your bowel doesn't work, and it means that your bladder doesn't work. And you're now faced all of a sudden, so ask anybody who becomes paralysed from the waist down what the biggest problem is, and it's not that you can't walk, it's you can't do those bodily functions that are just natural. You just can't do them. So there are other ways that you have to learn. So I'm thinking, well, what does this mean? I'm stuck in here and they're all leaving and I'm still in here. And after 10 days, they sent a person to see me from a specialist spinal unit, and I was deemed broken enough to be transferred from Southampton to Odstock, which is in Salisbury Hospital. And that was my first mistake, because they asked you a very simple question. Do you want to go in a bed or in a wheelchair? And I said, well, I'll go in a wheelchair. It's fine. I'll be okay. It was the most uncomfortable journey I've ever had. They put you in the middle of this minibus, they strap you in, and then they drive you at max 6 to, and I'm like, this is so uncomfortable. I wish I'd gone in the bed.
Having just had back surgery.
Exactly, and it's like, right, well, okay. So then we go to Odstock, and it's a fairly sobering place. It's a 42-bed ward with people with all sorts of paralysis from spinal injuries. There was a guy who was a BT engineer who forgot to clip himself onto a telegraph pole and fell off. That's pretty damaging. There was a young girl who'd been knocked off a motorbike, a lady who had a spinal stroke, who even knew that was a thing. And there was another lady with cauda equina syndrome. So all of a sudden you're now fully immersed with people with similar conditions, or certainly with paralysis. And that's a good thing because you can learn from each other, and you do very quickly. So I've always used humour in adversity. I think it's really important. If you can laugh at yourself, even when things are really, really bad, then you've got a better chance of outcome. Sorry, I'm twitching here because I get neuro cramps still, and they're painful, and I'm just having a minor one as we talk. So I learned a lot from chatting to people, and I very early on said to my physio, now they do a great job in these spinal units, but they're under-resourced and you don't get as much time as you would want. So you would get 3 hours of physio a week, but then you were allowed to go into, there were 2 gyms, an upstairs gym and a downstairs gym, and you were allowed to go, not unsupervised, supervised by a physio would be in there, and you could all just go and use the equipment, which I took full advantage of. But I said quite early on to the physio, right, this is how it's going to work between us, because they ask you what your goal is, what's your plan, what's this? And I am, as everyone who knows me will tell you, I can't operate without a plan. I am the human who needs to plan everything. My family rinse me for this permanently. I can't do anything without there being a plan, but I'm lucky that I'm able to adapt. If the plan doesn't work, I'll just have another plan. I'll go a different way, but I have to plan everything. And I said to her, so my goal is to walk again. And she looked at me almost in pity, as if to say, you'll be lucky. And I said, but it's incumbent on us and the other strength and conditioning people, everybody else, that we've got to be, there's one word I said, which you must always have with me, and that's be honest. Do not tell me that I'm going to be able to achieve something if you know that I can't, because I don't want to waste time here. I want to get to where I need to be. But if for whatever reason I can't, so obviously if my spinal cord had been severed, there would have been no chance. You can't walk if you sever your spinal cord. It wasn't severed, it was severely damaged. So I spent a long time listening, a long time learning. What does that mean? What has happened? And about 10 days after I arrived at Odstock, I was using weights in my wheelchair. And I thought, because it's really bizarre, it's funny how your mind goes. I thought, because I used to run every day before I got paralysed, and I was fit, and running was my way of sorting my head out before I went to work. I'd be fit, healthy body, healthy mind, all of that stuff. And I had this massive fear of getting overweight and becoming unfit, and I thought, right, I need to do all that I can to stay fit whilst I'm in this wheelchair. And I started getting pain down my side, and I wrote it off as muscular pain. But I mentioned it to the physio and to the doctor. I said, I've got this pain, it's between the ribs. I said, I just think it's an intercostal muscle. And they stuck their fingers in and it hurt. And I said, I'm sure it will go away. And 4 or 5 days later, I'll always remember this, it was a Saturday, I crashed. I couldn't breathe. I was, and all of a sudden there's loads of people around me sticking needles in here and here and here, and they rushed me down to a CT scanner and brought me back to the ward, and they said, you know that pain that you had, which you just thought was muscular? Yeah. They said, you have multiple embolisms in your lung which had dislodged, and you'd have been dead in 3 days.